Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome once again to the RSM's In Conversation on the unusual night of Monday. So before we get started, let's at least get the football completely out of the way. So what's the difference between Lassie the dog and football? Obviously, Lassie did come home. Excellent. So that's now done, down to business. And you can already guess who our guest tonight is. He's extremely recognizable. He's, I believe, the fourth most important person in England. At least that's what the BBC says. He's the chief executive of NHS England, but sadly for all of us, not for much longer because he's leaving at the end of this month. Now, Simon's not doing very many exit interviews, so we're very privileged here. That's because he told a mutual friend that they're a bit wanky, and he might well be right, and this could be the worst of all of those. But I'm going to try and keep the conversation interesting and avoid more obvious cliched questions, which I promise you Simon is so skilled at answering that there's really no point in even putting them to it. So Simon, welcome. How are you?
Hi Simon. Yes, good to be with you on this very wet and slightly depressing evening.
we said no football, so but you've already done it. But you're right, it is a bit depressing. So I guess then with nearly all of these In Conversation, we started off with something COVID related, and I don't think we've ever found anyone who hasn't got something to say about this, and you could be the first exception to that, but I doubt that. So let's do something very topical. We heard the new health secretary today, and the Prime Minister was talking, I think, up until we came on air, and it's the obvious question to ask the head of NHS England, but cases are on the up again. I'm going to say, do you know the latest statistics? Probably the most stupid question that anyone has ever asked you. So 2,800 COVID positive questions in English hospitals at the moment, and it's rising by 40 to 50% a week. And if it continues for much longer, we might have lost about 10% of our beds in a few weeks. So although this is not the same as last year, or indeed last Christmas, a lot of people are getting very anxious about this, nervous and concerned. Where are you? Where do you stand on this question?
Well, let's start with the facts. You've laid out some of them, Simon. Right now, we've got fewer than 1 in 10 of the number of COVID positive inpatients that we had in the peak of January, but that number has doubled in the last fortnight. So that clearly is a concern. What we're also seeing is a big shift in the age of patients who are being hospitalized. And so looking over the past week or so, more people under 35 have been hospitalized than people over 75. And that is obviously a complete inversion of what we've seen up until now. And that is principally because of the magic of vaccination. And so it is quite likely that we will see in a sort of 90% plus reduction of the risk of severe illness or hospitalization for those who've been doubly vaccinated. Those are the figures that people like Patrick Vallance and others have been using based on the real world data so far. But clearly, we've not finished the job on vaccination for younger people. And even for those who have been vaccinated, there is a residual risk. So I think you would be, if COVID has taught us anything, it is that it is foolish to make one-way bets as to what the future will hold.
Okay, but to push you just slightly on that, obviously the graphs look very different to what they looked 6 months or a year ago. But the situation also is a bit different within the NHS in the sense that it's running much hotter than it was during those days when COVID was the only game in town, as it were. And Gus O'Donnell was talking about this recently, that we are going back to quite a lot of normal business. A&E attendance are up, mental health attendances, all of these things that were dramatically down. So it's not quite the same picture in the system as it was 12 months ago.
Certainly, comparison with 12 months ago, that's right. Although I do just want to slightly correct you, Simon, in that even in the first wave of COVID, the NHS was never a COVID-only service.
Okay.
At peak COVID, for every one COVID inpatient, there were at least 2 other patients with non-COVID conditions who were being looked after in hospital, which is not to in any way deny the fact that if you deal with over 400,000 severely ill coronavirus inpatients, as hospitals have had to do since the start of the pandemic, that clearly has a disruptive impact on other care. And actually, the story of spring going into summer this year has been a story of a strong rebound on the part of the wider range of health services that, of course, we have to continue to provide. As you say, we're seeing that not only in emergency presentations in mental health, but cancer referrals and particularly routine operations, where routine operations are now subject to the constraints that the infection control processes require, are now back at sort of 92, 93% of their normal levels, despite those infection control constraints.
But those infection control constraints are not small, though, are they? I mean, I think if you have 2 COVID patients in an 8-bedded ward, you've lost the whole 8-bedded ward. Is that roughly?
That's right. That is imposing a big capacity constraint on what hospitals are able to do. And that's why it will be so important that looking out over the next 6 or 12 months, obviously the public health experts will be keeping those guidelines under review, but we are going to need more capacity to do more operations in order to be able to get weights back down again.
Yeah, I mean, that's clear. I mean, where do you think that capacity will come from?
Well, there was talk at the weekend that if no action was taken, then the number of people waiting could increase from 5 million to 13 million. But clearly, that is not what ought to happen. Over the next 3 years or 30 months or so, it is possible to put in place the extra resources, the operating capacity, new ways of doing fast diagnostics that will mean that doesn't come to pass. But that is the counterfactual, if you like. That's what, absent any effective action, could come about, recognizing that there are 3 big uncertainties that are confronting hospitals on this point. The first is, how many coronavirus patients will they be looking after over the next 12, 24, 36 months? Secondly, will there be the opportunity to adjust some of those constraints on the infection control requirements, which obviously it's vital are in place while they're needed? And thirdly, what will be the extent of patients coming forward for care when they didn't do so over the last 15 or 18 months?
Okay. And in your 30 million answer, you've already knocked off the question the editor of the HSJ has just asked, so, which is exactly that. It was about what do you think of the 30 million, as you say, being around question.
Well, I think the health service has shown in the past, it's shown in the early 2000s, it has indeed shown throughout the coronavirus pandemic that, to coin a phrase, give us the tools and we will finish the job. And so what we need is a clear plan for the next 3 years or so, backed by resourcing, support for the staffing, the facilities, in order to get weights back down. Now, there is some positive news on that front, in that the average wait for routine care has fallen from over 19 weeks last July to around just under 11 weeks in the most recent figures that were reported last week. So this can be done, but it's going to require an almighty effort.
Okay, well, we'll come back to a bit of those topics, but this is an In Conversation. It's not a press conference. It's not even our COVID webinar. So it's also, you know, a bit, well, quite a lot actually, or all of it really, is also about you, because people are, including myself, are absolutely fascinated by you. You're an extraordinary performer, extraordinary speaker, in so many respects, profoundly impressive. So let's go back to the beginning. You're actually, and I didn't actually know this actually, but you're a comprehensive boy, aren't you? You're completely state educated.
Yes, I went to a very good comprehensive St. Bartholomew's school in Newbury, and benefited hugely from a great education there. Okay.
Actually, I thought you went to school in Birmingham. I'm not done my homework on this one, because I thought
my parents moved, and that's where I went to secondary school.
Okay, and your dad is a Baptist minister.
Yes.
And that your mum works.
A retired university administrator.
Okay, right, good. So you've got a feel for both of those things. And you don't ever come across as someone who had a particularly angst-ridden, traumatic, disturbed childhood, but now's your chance to admit it if you did.
Well, I mean, coming from a former president of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, I think we can count that as a definitive thumbs up to the fantastic upbringing I had from my parents and family, which was a loving home and a stimulating environment, and I'm very fortunate as a consequence.
Yeah, I think we all are.
By the way, my mum's watching. There you go.
Oh, is she? Oh,
I don't know, but just on the off chance. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, right. Okay. Hello, Mrs. Stevens. Nice to see you. And then, of course, you got into Oxford, Balliol. The devil was a Balliol man, wasn't he? That was, I can't remember, some Victorian prelate said that. I can't remember which one, but he did actually say that. And you clearly had a pretty kind of glittering spires type experience there. Very well known. You became president of the union in '87, etc., etc. And you were very good at debate and all that stuff. And so you went on a what's now become quite a famous debating tour of the United States. Was that your first trip there, by the way?
It was, yeah. In fact, it was my first time on a plane, I think. Yeah.
Oh, same as me. Yeah, about the same age as well. Now, that was with a Mr. Boris Johnson, who I believe has done quite well in this parish. So let's start out with, I want to ask you that a sliding doors question, all right? What would have happened if you two had exchanged kind of persona, and he had gone into the NHS and you had gone into politics? What would life look like a bit now if that had happened? If in the middle of a debate you'd change sides, as it were?
Well, I can't answer that question, of course. I mean, that does remind me, there's a great book which you've probably got, Simon, called Napoleon's Hemorrhoids, which is about all these little accidents of fate. For anybody who's not got it, look at it, it's remaindered or on secondhand bookshop or something.
Right.
I forget the guy, the author, but anyway, he points out that, I mean, it's things like the fact that Napoleon had a bad dose of an outbreak of the hemorrhoids on the morning of the Battle of Waterloo, and they didn't go around and do the inspection and so forth. So I think your question is sort of in that category of Napoleon's hemorrhoids, I'm afraid.
All right, as you're not going to answer it, I'll give you one of my own then. So Sir Morrell Mackenzie, ENT surgeon, is the cause of the First World War. Why? You did history, so come on.
Now, you know what? The only thing I'm now scratching my head because I remember being around at dinner with one of the ENT surgeons at St Thomas's Hospital, and he produced for me a little book as to why ENT surgery explains the world. Yeah. And no doubt this is a chapter in that book, but unfortunately I cannot remember.
Okay, you're warm. He missed the throat cancer of the Kaiser's father, who the Kaiser's father was very Anglophile, but he died very shortly, as you know, and Kaiser Wilhelm took over, who was not Anglophile, partly because he blamed us on the death of his father, but also because he was a bit of a git. But yes, all right, well, that's in revenge for you not picking up the Boris question. I suppose I wasn't going to expect that you would do that. Anyway, okay, so all the counterfactuals of history are all absolutely fascinating. But but you did join the NHS, okay? And on that profile the BBC did of you, one of your friends said it was a surprise, that they were surprised that you did that, that expected you to go into the city or all sorts of other careers. So why choose that route?
Well, I don't think it was much of a surprise for those people who knew me aged 20 or 21. And indeed, I think it's one of the best decisions I've ever made, joining the NHS graduate training scheme. I didn't actually do it straight after university. I went and spent a bit of time working in Guyana in South America, but had already applied to come into the NHS. And in fact, there were three of us who were chosen to join the graduate training scheme for the northern region of England. And of the three of us, one went on to become a missionary in Moldova. The second became a monk, a Benedictine monk, and still is. And the third was me. So somebody pointed out on all three counts, the NHS did a really bad job of choosing people to come work in the Newcastle area in 1988. So
are those two still in the NHS then? Or
no. I mean, Sue is.
Oh, that's what they did after.
And Ben, who's now Chad, is a monk at Ampleforth.
Right. Okay.
But I think what you can say is that coming into the NHS was clearly driven by a sense of mission and purpose, and that brings a lot of people into the NHS, not just in the clinical professions, but more generally. And I think one of the few silver linings of the last 18 months has been that a lot of young people have seen the work of NHS staff, the clinical professions, and have been inspired to come join us. And so actually we've seen I think it's a 34% increase in undergraduate nursing applications and the highest ever applications for medical school. So
we have indeed. Yeah.
The NHS continues to inspire and motivate bright people to come and join us.
And a big jump in psychiatry as well. We've filled all our places and more as well. And indeed, psychiatry was your first kind of proper post, wasn't it? So after you'd done a few odd jobs, you was it North Tyneside or somewhere? You were somewhere up there.
Yeah, that's right. In North Tyneside and Northumberland, and I was actually encouraged to take a assignment in mental health by a very inspirational guy called Lionel Joyce, who at that time, maybe you know Lionel, was running mental health services in Newcastle, and he essentially, this was the point at which there was still a number of remaining long stay Victorian asylums, and he very persuasively showed me, as I talked to people who were using those services, been living in some of the so-called back wards for long periods of time, that was a very poor model of care. So my first main role was helping essentially reshape close the long stay psychiatric hospital at St George's in Morpeth and reconfigure into a range of community-based services. Now, there are sort of legitimate criticisms along the way, aspects of how that worked, but fundamentally, anybody who ever spent any time in those old Victorian asylums would know that they were completely inappropriate as a way of looking after people with severe and enduring mental health problems.
Although, I mean, when they were first built, they weren't seen that way, were they? They were actually seen as the opposite. They were seen as a
positive sense, a place of safety and security, and self-contained institutions with farms and workshops and all that went alongside that. But by the time we got to, well, I mean, I'm speaking to the person who probably has written the history of this, but by the time we got to the 1980s, 1990s, I think it was obvious that essentially warehousing people with schizophrenia was entirely wrong.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. But it's just important that the people who built them were not, reactionaries, and not everything in Foucault is true. And they were also seen as places away from the pollution and the stress and the misery of the city. They were also, they had a natural function, by which I mean to do with nature, and they were felt to be healthy places. But obviously that all changed, quite right. It's a shame you didn't stay in mental health, because you could have made something of yourself, really, but you can't have everything.
Well, I sort of feel I did in a way, because I think one of the things I've tried to do over the last 7 years as NHS Chief Exec is actually make sure that mental health gets its proper place in the sun. And I think for the first time in the history of the NHS, we've made sure that each year the funding for mental health services grows faster than the overall NHS budget. So mental health is growing as a share of the pie in recognition of the very significant unmet need that there is for mental health services as compared with physical health services.
Okay, fair enough. And Emma Vardy has just said that her grandfather died in St George's in Morpeth of dementia. So just to record that, I don't think she's blaming you for that, but just having it acknowledged. So, and then these places are redolent with history, and people did live their lives out there. And there was, there were some very poignant moments when they were closed, and all the ceremonies that went on to remember all the people who've been there. Anyway, you came out to London.
Certainly at St George's. I mean, there were at least second generation staff who were working there, whose parents were there, possibly further back, I don't know. but I mean, a very embedded part of that part of the community, and that was true in a number of these institutions.
Yeah, true. So you moved down to London and to Guy's and St Thomas's. So, and I can't remember what job you were doing there actually.
Well, two things really. I was group manager for surgery at Guy's and Tommy's, and then the bringing together, the merger of Guy's and St Thomas's, which was not without its
yes.
Initial controversies. There was a big review had been going on of the London hospitals. Chap called Bernard Tomlinson had done
Yes,
a review,
yes, I remember.
and at one point there was a proposal that either Guy's or St Thomas's should close. Fortunately, that was rejected. There was a proposal that Bart's should close, and indeed one of the first things that Frank Dobson did when he became Health Secretary was go into bat for keeping Bart's Hospital, albeit sort of reconfigured. And he said, I remember Frank saying to me, I do not want there to be a blue plaque up on the side of St Bartholomew's Hospital saying, this hospital treated the wounded of Agincourt, closed by Frank Dobson, 1997.
Well, although again, to be fair, I remember Virginia Bottomley when she was attacked because it was her proposal, wasn't it, to close it. And everyone said it's been around since whenever it was, the Battle of Agincourt. And she just said, I'm not the Minister for the National Heritage, which actually was not a bad reply.
No, indeed. That's right. But if you go to Bart's today and you see the excellent cardiac facilities, the specialty services, the way in which, together with the Royal London, you and that group of hospitals have responded across East London to everything that's been thrown at them over the last year and a half, I think it's very good to still have that fantastic asset available for treating patients in the NHS.
So I mentioned of Frank Dobson, you became his SPAD, didn't you, his health advisor? Were they called SPADs then? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I was his policy advisor person, but yeah.
That was a bit of a jump, wasn't it? I mean, did he just kind of meet you in the corridors at Guy's and St Thomas's and say, I like the look of you, young man, or what? What happened?
No, I did. I mean, I did a couple of other things between the one and the other. So I did a Hartness fellowship in New York City Health Department, which was at the time when the HIV epidemic was on the rampage, and the question of HIV and multi-drug resistant TB was a big issue across New York City. The health commissioner at the time was a woman called Peggy Hamburg, who went on to become FDA commissioner.
Yeah.
And I also had the great benefit of meeting my wife while working at New York City Health Department as well, as a Hartness Fellow at Columbia. So then came back here, took another job in the NHS, working for East Sussex, Brighton and Hove Health Authority as one of the executive directors down there. And then it was after that that I went to the Department of Health, and that was in 1997.
Okay, but then you did move into that job, and then you spent 7 years, didn't you, with him, and then moving on to the boss himself.
Yeah, it was 7 years at the Department of Health, and then at 10 Downing Street.
Yeah. So give us a sense of what that. I mean, that must have been. Was that actually the most exciting part of your life?
No, I think no. I'm not sure of that. I would say that, but it was obviously an important moment for some big decisions that needed to be taken about the NHS, and some of those decisions have, I think, had an enduring positive effect. You know, the creation of NICE was an answer to the questions around postcode lotteries and rationing of care. The decision in 2000 to address the build-up of underfunding in the NHS, the first half of the 2000s, obviously led the way to big improvements in the quality of care and the responsiveness of the NHS, helping bind people in and support its continuation. Because my view is there's nothing God-given about having an NHS. The NHS has to win the support of each generation, and doing what was done in the early 2000s, where waits for routine care were cut from 18 months to under 18 weeks was a big part of that. We saw public satisfaction double with the NHS, partly as a consequence.
Yeah, okay. I just want a question. I don't understand this question, but I'm just going to ask you if you understand it.
You don't understand the question. I'm not sure I'll be able to give you an understandable answer.
Well, you might, though. I just wonder if this is some NHS story or something. Did Simon advise Frank Dobson to stop or discourage medics prescribing Viagra? That's just such a weird question. I just have to ask it to you. Do you get the background to that, or is it something that I'm just completely unaware of?
No, well, I'm trying to remember the historical record there, but the controversy, if we want to get to the I won't say the number of the question, I might be misheard. The controversy was, as you know, Pfizer accidentally discovered that their product, which had been designed for another purpose, produced this now famous side effect. And so I remember Pfizer coming to actually see me before they got their license and explain what this was all about. And their case was that it should be prescribed on the NHS. Frank Dobson, as the Health Secretary, took a different view and thought that on balance that would be hard to justify given the resource constraints at the time. The company then sued the Department of Health, or the Secretary of State, to say that the decision was wrong because it hadn't been made transparently. And they, I think, included in the judicial review bundle their version of the meeting they held with me, at which they claimed that I laughed at them when they suggested this should become a taxpayer funded benefit. But in any event, that is all ancient history. It was prescribed for a limited range of conditions on the NHS, and that has expanded somewhat since.
I had just forgotten all about that. I presume that played something to do with the introduction of NICE to avoid politicians having to make that decision.
That and a few other controversies at the time really made the argument for why you should make these decisions at arm's length from the political process, not to say the decision right or wrong, but just that there should be a defensible basis for making these judgments with a set of yardsticks that are comparable between drugs and treatments, with a process of consultation so people have a chance to make their representations. And that is a mechanism that has stood the test of time. 2 decades later, NICE still helps drive the wise use of resources in the NHS.
So, I mean, this is an in conversation. It's not. This is not an inquiry. It's and lots of people are asking questions, some of which really are just saying, you know, what happened then and things like that. So, I want also to have a bit of not digression, but a bit of reflection. And you and I both share an interest in modern history, and we swap books and all that kind of stuff. And one thing that strikes me that I'd just like to have your views on is that if you look back at the history of the NHS, and I know you have, you know, first of all, is that in the first even 20 years of the NHS, it wasn't a big issue. If you look at for politics, if you look at the party manifestos, it's barely mentioned. It's not even mentioned in the Tories in 51, and Labour only gave it one line. And that continues for the next 15 years. It's right at the bottom, at the most a couple of paragraphs. There's a bit on prescription charges, a bit on hospital rebuilding, but it's not political, very little. Everything is about politics, war, peace, disarmament, the economy, employment, trade unions, and so on. And that goes on really for 20 years. And why do you think that that's obviously not the case now, but when do you think the change started to happen, and why? But certainly for the first 20 years, the NHS was not a, quote, political football.
Even within those first 20 years, though, if you go back and look at the debates within the various governments of the time, NHS issues were hot potatoes. And so we look at the cabinet discussions around the introduction of prescription charges.
Ah, yes, that's what. Yeah.
You know, that split the split opinion within the cabinet, and part of, I think, the answer to the question is that to some extent the chickens didn't really come home to roost on some of the big questions that needed sorting out in the expanding National Health Service for some years after it was created. For example, there was very little in the way of capital investment in new buildings across the service, and that really was a question that sort of hoved into view in the 60s and 70s. Challenges to the way in which care was provided. I mean, again, you think of the long stay hospitals, the scandals that arose. They again were partly an example of a bigger phenomenon, I think, which is that the NHS both shapes our society and is shaped by it. And so topics that become salient across our society are then refracted within the NHS itself. So if the 1970s is characterised by appalling industrial relations in the UK, then the NHS becomes a site for those industrial relations struggles playing out. If questions around consumerism and transparency and the power of patients versus secrecy and paternalism, then questions around the thalidomide scandal or, as I say, the Ely Hospital scandal and so on, those become sort of touch points, as in the same way that now we see questions of immigration and racism across the country also refracted through the lens of what's happening inside the NHS. You know, at its best, the NHS brings out the better angels in our country, but it is also a human institution, and it is sometimes those other pathologies that we see more widely are also reflected inside even our most trusted human institutions.
Yeah, and I mean, that's just one quick question for you, so you can guess this right. But do you know the year in which the NHS first became what's the phrase? The NHS is well, I've forgotten the exact phrase. This election will decide the future of the NHS. Which, do you know what year that first appeared in a manifesto? It's Labour, obviously, but do you know roughly when?
Well, the 1983 election, which was sort of Michael Foot, Margaret Thatcher, I don't know, that would be a candidate for that. Was that 1983?
It's slightly later, actually. It's Kinnock. It's Kinnock 92. But I think I did check on those, actually, and I think the first one is Kinnock 92. It's the same year that Nigel Lawson famously announced the NHS is the nearest thing we have to a national religion.
Yes, and I mean Rudolph Klein, who is, you know, I think the greatest sort of analyst of the history of the NHS. Really, I mean, makes this point that the history of the NHS is really a history between two competing conceptions. I'm paraphrasing a bit now: the NHS as church or the NHS as garage, and Lawson was obviously critiquing one of those two.
Yes, his actual quote went on. He said, with those who practice it, that's the NHS, the religion, regarding themselves as a priesthood. So that would make you the Archbishop of Canterbury, I suspect.
Well, we did have a service down at St Paul's last Monday, of course, for the a service of commemoration and Thanksgiving, both for the pandemic and the 73rd anniversary of the NHS. But you know what, flippancy aside, I'm not sure we should necessarily decry this, because there aren't that many institutions in our country that actually bring people together, that embody a sense of us together more impactful than us apart. And one of the things, I think maybe we'll come on and talk about it, but one of the things I think the vaccination program has shown is that trust counts for an awful lot. high trust institutions are more likely to be able to support a population do the right thing for actions that aren't purely about what's best for me and mine, but are also about what we are doing to protect us all together.
Okay, well let's talk about that then. We had Kate Bingham on the program, as they say, a few weeks ago, and I have to say she was absolutely fantastic, brilliant speaker, and her opening things was, I got my job on the Friday and we bought us factory on the Sunday. You think, God, that's cool. But that's providing vaccines. So tell us what the NHS then did to kind of actually, as they say, put these into arms.
Well, I think the success of the UK vaccination programme has got sort of three pillars, essentially. One pillar are a set of actions that were taken nationally. The second pillar was the way in which the NHS as a delivery system has been mobilised. And the third was the fact that this was also done in a way that involves volunteers, local community organisations, faith groups, and many others. And so I think each of those three has been essential to the success of the programme. And I mean, look, I mean, we're not complete, but why do I say it's successful? I mean, over 85% of adults have now had their first vaccination. 2/3 have had both jabs, the double doses that give the fullest possible protection. And we are, at least 10 percentage points better vaccinated at the moment than, Germany, France, the USA, and so on. I think we've overtaken Israel now. Which is of course a source of that sort of positive factor, in as much as we actually want everybody to do well worldwide on vaccination. I think about a quarter of the population globally have had at least one jab so far. That means 3/4 haven't. But in any event, how is it that we have been able to be the fastest, most precise deployer of vaccinations? Firstly, on the national piece then, I think there were some good public health policy decisions made in the finest traditions of the sort of empirical evidence-based judgments in this country, the decisions on how to prioritise down the age pyramid based on risk, but doing it in such a way as to not introduce so much complexity that it actually slowed down the speed of the rollout. The decision on the timing of first and second vaccinations turns out to have been a very good decision indeed. And the fact that nationally the NHS has the data and the logistics to get the right vaccines to the right places at the right time, those set of things nationally, together with the procurement piece that Kate Bingham was talking about, but all of those are necessary nationally in order to be able to make the programme work. But by itself, that would have done nothing if it hadn't been for the fact that we, fortunately, over the last year or two, have actually supported GPs to club together in their local areas to create what are called primary care networks, serving 30 to 50,000 people. And that turns out to be exactly the right sort of population unit to get going with vaccinating at the apex of your 85-year-olds, your 75-year-olds, your 65-year-olds, and so on, because each individual GP practice wouldn't have enough of those patients to be able to get sufficient vaccine supply, particularly early on with the Pfizer vaccines that required a big cold chain and to be in the deep freeze and so forth. So the GPs, the primary care networks, but also I would say the pharmacists, the hospital hubs, the whole NHS delivery system has turned out to be much more effective than a number of other countries' healthcare systems at getting vaccines into arms. But the third piece, I really do believe, is that the reach of the programme has been because it has also engaged unconventional partners, if you like. The fact that you can get your vaccines after Friday night prayers at the mosque, the fact that you can do so at your local village hall, the fact that local community leaders are helping overcome remaining vaccine hesitancy questions, all of that is important on the demand side, if you like, so that uptake is responding to the offer that the NHS is making. But we've still got work to do. The fact is that we have, for 18 to 24-year-olds, I think about 3/5 of 18 to 24-year-olds have had their first dose. So we'd love to get that more 18 to 24-year-olds coming forward and having their dose.
I mean, I'm glad you said that. A certain GP we both know is out of the house at the moment. I've certainly heard her calling up elderly patients and getting them up for the jabs. But slightly more worrying though, I mean, today for the first time, we only vaccinated 75,000 first jabs, and that's not because of lack of supply. One gets the feeling that there's we're now, the ones who want to be vaccinated are running out.
Well, for people in their 40s, I think 87% of people have had their first dose, and by and large, people who've had their first dose are coming back for their so we saw very strong uptake amongst people in their 20s when the offer was first made. We need to continue to finish the job, and I think it's possible that given the changes that have been announced by the government in travel quarantine, that would be a further encouragement to people to come forward and be jabbed.
Okay. Now, there's so many questions. We're not going to get through them, folks. I'm just telling you now, we're not going to. But quite a few are about money and the funding of the NHS. So I thought we might just have a brief canter through that. I mean, you now spend 10% of our entire GDP, by the way, as I'm sure you know.
And it's worth every penny, Simon.
Yes, it is.
A few pennies more.
But I mean, I don't know if you saw, someone's actually asked, did you read any of the papers from the Lancet Commission on the future of the NHS? Because I don't know whether you did or didn't, but Anita Charles,
great piece of work, yeah.
Yeah, so I did have a look at Anita Charlesworth, the economist, on hers, and the basic point that they're making, obviously, you know far better than me, that basically public spending on health has been increasing throughout the life of the NHS overall of about 3.7% a year since it was founded. And therefore the amount of our GDP has steadily gone up to the current of 10%. Now, when you were in your first kind of encounter with the DH and then Downing Street in the 1997 to 2009, it went up to 6%. So I just wanted to go back to that first before we then go to what happened next. But just how did that work? I mean, I mean, I know you ate lots of pizza because one of your collaborators told the BBC that you spent a lot of time eating pizza overnight. But I'd just love to know, how did you actually manage that? And was there opposition, or was it all plain sailing?
The big catch-up spending in the...
the big catch-up spending.
Well, I think the government at the time took office in 1997, and after several years, it was pretty obvious that it had to be double or quits when it came to the NHS. Either the NHS was going to get a significant infusion of resources to enable it to expand staffing, cut waits, improve the quality of care for a range of other conditions, or it was likely to end up in a death spiral. And I don't think there was a huge debate inside the government at the time, but about, in principle, the fact that therefore the right thing to do would be to back the investment and ally that with reform. But of course, when it actually came to it, famously, it was an announcement that Tony Blair made on the Sunday morning chat show, the precursor to Andrew Marr, which was called Breakfast with Frost. And he went on that show and to many people's surprise, announced that over the next 5 years, the NHS would get increased investment so it would equal the European average. I've sort of written somewhere, I think, described that as the most expensive breakfast in British history, a phrase that various people have subsequently reused. But the reality, I think, is that that paid off. As I said a moment ago, waits came down, staff numbers improved, and public satisfaction nearly doubled.
Yep, all of that's the case.
But I think it also illustrates one of the other essential problems for 7 decades worth of NHS funding, which is it's far too lumpy. It would be far better to have the predictability of a multi-year funding settlement steady as she goes at a reasonable level, rather than bouncing off the banks between feast and famine. And that is one of the good things that occurred a few years back with the NHS long-term plan, where we got a multi-year funding settlement for the NHS for 5 years. And that, I think, is something that, with hindsight, would have been far better if post-war governments could all have done something similar. But in practice, what's happened is that when the UK economy sneezes, NHS funding catches a cold, as again I've also said in the past. And so all of the existential crises that have occurred in the history of the NHS have been linked to the nosediving of the performance of the British economy, which then in turn has translated, sometimes with a lag of a year or two, into a funding squeeze in the NHS. And then the gap opens up between the treatments that we could be providing and the treatments that we are able to provide. And fortunately, that gap converged in the 2000s. And I think, frankly, a lot of the progress that is made over the course of the history of the NHS, including in the last 10 years, is progress that you almost don't notice at the time, because a lot of it is, if you want to use a posh word, sort of economist word, exogenous to any individual country's healthcare system. You get new treatments for cystic fibrosis now available on the NHS. The NHS now offering a couple of new treatments for spinal muscular atrophy, including one gene therapy that was described as the world's most expensive drug, list price at £1.8 million per patient. Confidential negotiation between NHS England and the manufacturer to get that at a price that represents value for money for NHS patients, now available for young children across the NHS. We are on track to potentially eliminate hepatitis C as a result of new treatments. The same is possible for HIV. So these big advances are sort of happening almost unseen to the naked eye. But when you stand back and you look at the big advances, you can see they have been occurring.
Nicely put. Now, the question that you jumped ahead really was, why did we slow down to 1 to 2% between 2010, 2018? But maybe I doubt that you'll.
Well, for the same reason that has happened throughout NHS history, it's been linked to the performance of the UK economy. Now, that's not to say there aren't, political choices that get made on the back of it, but as a indisputable sort of line of history, you can see an economic crunch followed by a squeeze on public spending, and given the composition of NHS resources as a share of that, that tends to have an impact in the NHS.
All right, but then that does leave the obvious question about where we're going now. Now, I know economic forecasting was invented to make astrology respectable, but the OECD says we won't be back on track till 2022, and lots of people say that's wildly optimistic, doesn't even take account of Brexit and things like that. The Lancet Commission concluded, and I think you agree, because I think you said something similar, that to stand still, we need to grow about 4% per year in real terms. How's that going to happen to get us out of COVID? How is that going to happen to do, whether it's 13 million, 50 million or whatever, the waiting list, you mentioned things need to happen, but how is that going to happen in the state of the economy now? And basically.
In fairness, the NHS has had substantially more than that as part of the COVID response over the last 18 months.
Yes.
So there's been a very significant increase in spending over and above the agreed multi-year budget. So I think the question really is, as hopefully COVID pressures diminish looking out over the next several years in the NHS, then that creates a dividend, if you like, from that degree of that level of COVID spending, some of which will no doubt be redeployed for other public purposes, but some of which will need to be reinvested in dealing with the additional care needs that have arisen during the pandemic. And that will be not just long COVID, additional mental health needs, but also the backlog of disrupted routine care, including cancer services that we've talked about. So I think there's fiscal headroom in the resources that have been allocated over the last 18 months, and there will be a series of policy choices to make. But back to where we started, if we're going to make sure that that 13 million people on the list does not materialise, then making those decisions prospectively on a multi-year basis will be a sensible way to proceed.
All right. Now, another question come up, which is a fair question, is that I remember you, the interviews that you gave in 2014, you outlined some of the major challenges that you would face, and you also said it wouldn't be possible, and no human being could sort all those out, and that was true. One of the ones was, of course, health and social care. And Sheila Hollins, Baroness Hollins, I'm sure you know, has asked, what are the plans for that one, basically? Slightly mischievous, but nevertheless, what can you say?
No, well, I think that's, and hi Sheila, good. So my view is that although the public discussion on social care reform has often looked mainly at the question of whether, if you get dementia and need to go into care home, you should have more public funding so that you don't have to sell your home and run down your assets for your care home costs, aka the Dilnot question.
Yeah.
That question by itself is not the only question that needs resolving. This is not just a question about the fairness of the funding burden, it is also about the extent of unmet need in adult social care. And so any reform solution has got to deal with expanding the availability of care, and it's also got to change the way in which that care is offered, more personalised, more flexible, less binary choices confronting people between being looked after at home or having to go to a care home, more flexible forms of housing with care. And it has also got to recognise that fundamentally the social care workforce needs more and better support. We've got significant numbers of vacancies in social care. We've got perhaps 25% of people on 0 hours contracts, high workforce churn. So an approach to adult social care reform has got to deal with all 4 of those. Yes, the fairness of the funding burden, but also unmet need, the way in which care is being provided, and the support for the staff who are doing so. Are we going to get that? I think the stars are aligning. I think the recognition through the last 18 months of the extreme pressures in social care, as well as those we've seen in the NHS, mean that it will be, I think, hard for policymakers to duck this question for much longer.
A new beverage reports is occasionally trialed across the newspapers and in the gossip.
Well, certainly if Beveridge were, I think I said this last July, if Beveridge were writing another report now, security and dignity in old age would be a new giant social question that needs tackling. With this little caveat, Simon, that you would, I'm sure, want me to enter in the record as well, which is that, of course, about half of adult social care services, or the funding thereof, are supporting people with physical disabilities, mental health needs, and learning disabilities and or autism. So adult social care is not purely and simply, or even mainly, about support for older people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're quite right. All right, so we're coming towards the end, but again, I just want you to reflect a bit that everybody who knows you and everyone who doesn't, they don't say that you would have been a great politician. What they actually say is that you are a great politician. which I think is true, hidden in a kind of technocratic suits, as it were, but you are very good at that. And you spent a long time at the center of power and policy. I just wonder about this talk again. It's coming up again with the new reform, another, the successor to Lansley. And everyone talks about the importance of depoliticizing the NHS and so on. But first of all, is that possible? I suspect it isn't. And is it even desirable? Is it just silly to talk about depoliticizing the NHS, given it's 10% of our GDP and it's so important to our national life? Should we just give up and say it's political, get used to it?
I think it's if it's a binary question, political or non-political NHS, that's the wrong way of characterising the choice. It's where along the spectrum and which types of topic are the subject of political debate and which aren't. So the moment the NHS stopped being part of our national political debate would be the point at which nobody cared about it anymore. And that would be the point at which the NHS would begin to wither on the vine. So I think not only as a sort of fundamental point of democratic accountability in a public service, but also the cut and thrust of debate on the NHS is, to say we won't have politics in the NHS is like, or to curse politics in the NHS is a bit like, a fisherman cursing the sea. But that said, there are a whole range of things that it is far better if they are decisions that are made locally rather than nationally. They are made taking account of patient preferences and different communities across the country. They're informed by clinicians and local leaders rather than one size fits all across the country, because although in one sense we're a small island, we are actually quite a heterogeneous country. And I think one of the mistakes of various approaches to NHS reform down the years has been to assume that everything has to neatly look identical in every part of the country. And that is why one of the things that I've tried to do actually back from 2014 is say, to coin a phrase, horses for courses is okay. Things can look different in Cumbria than they do in Lambeth. And as we do that, let's recognise that these arrangements will evolve. We've got to back leadership where we find it in different ways and different places across the country, and recognise that the NHS also has to stand up and be part of some of the bigger debates that are going on across society.
Okay. Yeah, I thought you'd say something like that, and
well,
you are brilliant.
Anything else would be a stylized answer, wouldn't it, Simon? I mean, to say,
yes.
I mean, you can have too much politics on the wrong sort of question. Of course you can, which is why, as I said earlier, I think decisions around the relative cost effectiveness of medicines are best made through nice type processes. And in fairness, that not only benefits taxpayers, but generally it benefits patients as well. And I think I mentioned the example earlier of the new cystic fibrosis treatments. I mean, the fact is there was a major standoff with the company in question that went on for over 18 months. And I think it's a credit to our politicians, not just ministers, but also members of parliament, that rather than succumbing to the lobbying campaign, they allowed the NHS and the clinically led appraisal process they stuck with it. And that ultimately meant that our cystic fibrosis patients got the best new medicines the day they were licensed at a price that was fair to all patients across the NHS, even those who don't have cystic fibrosis.
Okay, got that. One thing that you've always said to us is that one thing you don't think will change. You don't think that any politician would ever go to the country or even think of going to the country with any change to the fundamental way in which we run the NHS, free at the point of care and so on. Do you still think that's true?
Well, I think that's up to us as the voters, isn't it? I mean, we get to make these choices, and
come on, that wasn't my question.
Politicians are they will read their audience, and I think one of the remarkable things, actually, after the intense pressures of the last year and a half through the COVID pandemic, is that the NHS has emerged with its reputation enhanced in the public mind. People have seen how staff have, under most extraordinary circumstances, had to respond, and have done so, I think, magnificently, quite frankly. And I think the politicians would be ill-advised to ignore what the public can see.
Okay, so you have answered the question. All right, I'll take that. All right, now one question you're not going to answer is anything I ask you about your successor. So there's absolutely no point to doing that. But what I would like to say is this. I mean, if I asked you how's the last 7 years been, I'm sure you'll tell me it's been amazing, exciting, thrilling, all of that stuff, because I'm sure it has. But the job itself, the late Janet Malcolm, she died last week, who wrote a book called Psychoanalysis, The Impossible Profession. Well, you might have read, actually, Maggie will have done. But it really, Chief Executive of the NHS, The Impossible Profession, okay? Would you wish that on your worst enemy, your job?
I would, and I've been encouraging anybody who's expressed an interest in applying to do so, but do so with your eyes open, and hopefully with a strong grounding in what the challenges facing the NHS will be over the next 3, 5 and 10 years. I mean, I think fundamentally we've got 1.4 million people who are, some of the most skilled and dedicated people, not just in this country, but the biggest employer in Europe. It is a privilege to work alongside and to help shape some of these big questions. You need a degree of humility about the extent to which what happens nationally affects where the magic really occurs, which is across frontline care provision. But I think it's a fantastic privilege, quite frankly, to have the opportunity to do the job I've done, and I'm very grateful for the chance to have done so.
Don't go. I need to one piece of housekeeping. Then I want to come back to you, but just to remind everybody, next week we will be back to our normal slot on Wednesday evenings. I should have forgotten myself now. And Baroness Helena Kennedy, the Chair of Justice, author of Eve Was Framed, and all sorts of other things. Undoubtedly a brilliant performer. She will be here 7 o'clock on Wednesday. And also to remind you still to please keep donating to the RSM. If you'd like to give 10%, Simon has 10% of the GDP. If we could get 10% of all your salaries, that would really help us. That would be really good. So Simon, now back to you. Now look, your future. Now you're not going to tell us what you're going to do. We know that. Although if you have agreed to do Strictly or Love Island, please do announce it now, because we could do with the scoop. Actually, someone says that JVT has agreed to do Strictly. Is that? Can you tell us? Did you hear that?
I don't know whether he's agreed. I mean, I've seen speculation that various people would like him to do it.
Okay.
But I'm not sure that he's yet said yes.
Okay, it'd be great. Anyway, I can't quite see you doing that. Love Island possibly, but Strictly not.
I can't see that either.
No, okay. So you're not going to tell us that, but I do know what you're about to do, because I do know this. You are about to go and do the Fastnet race for a month when you leave. Now, as I understand it, the Fastnet means something like constant gales, changes in direction, feeling sick the whole time, lots of people shouting at you, a fair chance of the ship overturning and you being thrown overboard.
It's going, by the way.
Yeah. Why didn't you just stay at NHS England for another month? You've got all that for free.
Yes, well, as an offshore stadium race, it does sometimes have those characteristics. Although if it takes us a month, we will have been incredibly slow. It should not take us quite that long, no. But anyway, yes, that will be something to look forward to for August. And then after that, everybody gives wise advice that is, don't jump from the frying pan to the fire. So look, there are lots of things I'm interested in. I'm interested in the way in which we can do what's required on the green agenda. We've got COP26 coming up in November. The NHS, actually under the leadership of Nick Watt from UCL, playing a really good role now in showing how a health system can decarbonise. We've got big social debates coming off the back of COVID around inequality and racism prevention and so forth. So look, I've got an open mind, but I'm sure whatever I do, Simon, it will involve continuing this relationship with the RSM and tuning into these fantastic sessions every once in a while.
That's fantastic. And well, as I say, I pity your successor, because if being the CEO of the NHS is an impossible profession, you are an impossible act to follow. You absolutely are. Please don't fall off the mast or do anything stupid. Yeah, I mean, it's just been a pleasure watching you and knowing you over the last, well, longer than 7 years, when you were a local councillor. Good God. Happy days. And whatever you do is going to be amazing. Please don't go back to America, though. You dropped in a bit of Lincoln, a bit of Hemingway as you're going along, so there's still, you know, a bit of a pull there, but stay here. We need you. Thank you so much for giving me your time, and I hope it wasn't too wanky an interview for you.
I think that's for those who tuned in to judge, Simon, but
yes, all right,
thanks very much indeed. And
okay, yeah. Take care, see you soon, and stay safe for once. Stay safe, for God's sake, on the ship. Oh dear. All right. Good night, everybody. Night, Simon.